Hello, welcome back to another video. Please consider giving us a like. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Fateful Journey. The grand steam locomotive, a behemoth of iron and coal, puffed steadily through the moonlit countryside, its wheels rhythmically clattering against the tracks. Inside, the Pullman carriage exuded an air of understated luxury, with plush seats and polished wood paneling that spoke of comfort and elegance. Sherlock Holmes reclined in his seat, a pipe lazily swaying between his fingers, his sharp eyes fixed on the passing darkness beyond the window. Dr. John Watson, ever the faithful companion, sat opposite him, engrossed in a novel but ever watchful of his friend's contemplative silence. The night was unusually serene, the only sounds the steady chug of the engine and the occasional whistle of the wind. Holmes was in one of his rare moments of relaxation, savouring the solitude that long journeys afforded. Watson glanced up from his book, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Quite the peaceful voyage, wouldn't you say, Holmes?" Holmes gave a subtle nod, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Indeed, Watson. Yet peace is often the calm before the storm." Their conversation was interrupted as the train sped through a narrow tunnel, plunging the carriage into darkness. The brief blackout lasted mere moments, but when the lights flickered back on, a scene of chaos unfolded at the rear of the coach. A body lay sprawled across the floor, surrounded by a distraught family. The man, unmistakably wealthy from his impeccable attire and the subtle gleam of a gold watch peeking from his cuff, was dead. His wife, elegantly dressed with her makeup, flawless even in the dim light, stood beside him, her children huddled close, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Strangely, the wife's expression was one of eerie calm, her lips pressed into a thin line and her hands folded neatly in front of her. Holmes's eyes sparkled with interest as he observed the scene. "Poison, Watson. The telltale signs of ingestion are evident." Dr. Watson set his book aside, concern etching his features. "Holmes, are you certain?" Holmes nodded slowly. "Quite certain. The subtlety of the poison suggests a calculated act, someone with knowledge and intent." The conductor, a young woman with pale cheeks and trembling hands, approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Holmes, sir," she began, her voice quivering, "there's been an incident. A man has died, and his family is here. The next station is still hours away, and we've contacted the authorities. They'll be arriving shortly." Holmes raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ah, splendid. Ample time to unravel this little mystery, wouldn't you agree, Watson?" Watson glanced between Holmes and the distressed family. "Do you think we can be of assistance, Holmes?" "Perhaps," Holmes replied, his eyes never leaving the scene. "But first, let us assess the situation with the clarity it deserves." He approached the body with deliberate grace, his keen eyes taking in every detail. The man's hands were neatly folded on his chest, his face devoid of any sign of struggle or pain. The wife, meanwhile, stood with an unnerving composure, her makeup impeccable, and her gaze fixed steadily on the ground. "Notice, Watson," Holmes whispered, nodding subtly towards the wife. "Her demeanor is most peculiar. In the face of such tragedy, one would expect more volatility." Watson followed his gaze, brow furrowing. "She seems almost too calm, as if she's expecting this." Holmes chuckled softly. "Expecting, perhaps, or complicit. Either way, her behavior warrants further scrutiny." He turned his attention to the children, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "Young ones, were you all served the same meal?" "Yes, sir," one of the children replied softly. "We ate everything just as usual." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Curious. The poison must have been administered selectively then, not through the meal itself, but perhaps through a specific portion. the conductor interjected, her voice shaky. "We have a cook and a waiter here, sir. They were the ones who prepared and served the meal." Holmes's eyes sparkled with interest. "Excellent. Let us speak with them." He motioned for the cook and waiter to join them, his mind already piecing together the initial clues. The cook, a stout man with flour dusting his apron, looked nervous under Holmes's piercing gaze. The waiter, slender and pale, avoided eye contact, his hands wringing nervously. "Gentlemen," Holmes began, his tone measured, "can you account for your actions during the meal service tonight?" The cook stammered. "I prepared the dishes as usual, sir." "Nothing out of the ordinary." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "And you, young man? Did you notice anything amiss while serving?" The waiter shook his head slightly. "No, sir. All went smoothly." Holmes leaned back, his mind racing. Interesting, because despite their assurances, there's an undercurrent of deceit here. One must always consider the possibility of hidden motives. Dr. Watson watched as Holmes engaged with the suspects, his admiration for his friend growing with each passing moment. Holmes had an uncanny ability to draw out the truth, peeling back layers of pretense with ease. As the train continued its journey through the night, Holmes and Watson settled into their roles as impromptu detectives. The atmosphere in the carriage was thick with tension, each passenger a potential suspect in this unfolding drama. The wheels of the train seemed to echo the ticking of a clock, counting down the hours until the authorities would arrive. Holmes finally turned to Watson, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "There is much to uncover, my dear Watson. A wealthy businessman, a composed wife, potential suspects with their own motives. This promises to be an intriguing puzzle." Watson smiled, his curiosity now fully piqued. "Indeed it does, Holmes. Let us see where your remarkable mind leads us." As the train hurtled through the night, the first chapter of this mysterious journey had been set into motion. Little did they know the revelations to come would test even Holmes's legendary intellect, weaving a tale of deceit, vengeance, and unexpected alliances. Chapter 2. An unsettling calm. The aftermath of the initial discovery settled into an uneasy silence within the Pullman carriage. Passengers exchanged hushed whispers, casting furtive glances toward the lifeless form that lay at the rear. Sherlock Holmes, however, seemed impervious to the surrounding turmoil, his mind already delving into the intricacies of the case. Holmes turned to Doctor Watson, who had resumed his seat beside him, concern etched across his features. "Watson, observe the demeanor of the deceased's family. There is a peculiar calmness, especially in the wife's comportment." Watson nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, Holmes, one would expect visible distress. Yet she remains unnervingly composed." Holmes's eyes never left the family. "Precisely. Such composure under tragic circumstances suggests either a profound resilience or perhaps complicity. Let us proceed methodically." He rose gracefully and approached the group, his presence commanding yet non-threatening. "Good evening. I understand this is a distressing time and I offer my sympathies. May I inquire about the circumstances surrounding Mr. Hargrave's untimely demise?" The wife, Lady Eleanor Hargrave, met his gaze with an unflinching stare. "Mr. Hargrave was a man of strict routines. Our dinner was prepared as always, nothing out of the ordinary." Holmes observed her closely, noting the immaculate application of her makeup and the subtle tension in her posture. "And did Mr. Hargrave express any concerns or mention anything unusual prior to this evening?" Lady Hargrave shook her head slowly. "No, sir. He was preoccupied with business matters, as always." Holmes turned his attention to the children, who clung to their mother with wide, fearful eyes. "And the children? Did they experience any discomfort after the meal?" A young girl, no more than 7, nodded hesitantly. We felt a little sleepy after eating, but it's not uncommon. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Sleepiness can be a symptom, but it's rather mild. The rapid onset suggests a potent substance was involved. Dr. Watson, ever the practical observer, interjected gently. Holmes, if it was poison, could it have been administered subtly, perhaps in a particular dish or drink? Holmes smiled slightly, appreciating Watson's insight. An excellent point, Watson. We must consider the possibility of selective administration. Let us speak with those responsible for the meal. Mr. Thompson swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. Targeted? I assure you, sir, there's no way I could have done such a thing. Holmes leaned in, his piercing gaze fixed upon the waiter. And you, sir? Your hands appear impeccably clean, yet the task required precision. Could you have administered the poison discreetly? The waiter shook his head fervently. No, sir. I was busy attending to the other tables. I had no opportunity. Holmes straightened, his mind already processing the information. Very well. Thank you for your cooperation. We may need to speak further as events unfold. As the staff departed, Holmes turned back to Watson. The plot thickens, my friend. Someone with access and intent, yet selective in their approach. The calmness of the wife is particularly intriguing. Watson pondered the situation. Do you suspect foul play beyond what is immediately apparent, Holmes? Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. Foul play is almost certain, given the methodical nature of the poisoning. We must consider all potential motives and relationships surrounding Mr. Hargrave. He glanced around the carriage, his sharp eyes catching every nuance. Every individual here is a potential suspect, each with their own secrets and possible motives. It is a veritable tapestry of human emotions and hidden agendas. Dr. Watson leaned closer, captivated by Holmes's analysis. Where shall we begin? Holmes took a moment, his mind racing ahead. We must explore the relationships of those closest to the victim, his family, the staff, and perhaps even other passengers. There lies the key to unraveling this mystery. As the train continued its steady journey through the night, Holmes and Watson immersed themselves in the intricate web of interactions within the carriage. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions and concealed truths, each passenger a silent player in this unfolding drama. Holmes's observations were meticulous. He noted the subtle shifts in body language, the fleeting glances exchanged between individuals, and the unintentional slips in conversation. Every detail, no matter how minor, was a potential clue in the grand puzzle. Watson, Holmes mused aloud, notice how Lady Hargrave maintains an impeccable exterior. Such control suggests either a strong emotional fortitude or a deliberate attempt to conceal her true feelings. Watson considered this. Perhaps she had a reason to remain composed. Could she have been involved in her husband's affairs in a way that necessitated secrecy? Holmes tapped his pipe thoughtfully. A plausible theory. Or perhaps she was acutely aware of her husband's enemies and chose to mask her anxiety to protect her children from further distress. Their investigation had only just begun, yet Holmes's intuition already hinted at the layers of deception and hidden motives that lay beneath the surface. As the hours stretched on, the confined space of the train carriage became a crucible in which truths would be forged and secrets exposed. The distant sound of the train whistle echoed through the night, a reminder of the relentless passage of time. Holmes and Watson knew that with each passing moment, the window for discovery narrowed, heightening the urgency of their quest for truth. In the stillness of the Pullman carriage, amidst the whispers of suspicion and the weight of unspoken fears, the first chapter of this enigmatic case had been set into motion. Sherlock Holmes, ever the astute observer, was poised to navigate the intricate maze of human behavior, determined to uncover the hidden truths that lay entwined with the shadow of death. Chapter 3. Threads of Suspicion. The Pullman carriage had settled into a tense stillness, each passenger acutely aware of the recent tragedy. Sherlock Holmes, ever the eagle-eyed investigator, was already dissecting the myriad possibilities that lay before him. Dr. John Watson observed his friend with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, knowing that Holmes's mind never ceased to unravel even the most intricate of mysteries. Holmes turned his attention back to Lady Eleanor Hargrave, whose composed demeanour continued to baffle and intrigue him. "Lady Hargrave," he began, his tone gentle yet probing, "might I inquire about your husband's recent business dealings? Any disputes or unusual activities that you're aware of?" Lady Hargrave met his gaze steadily, her eyes betraying nothing. "Mr. Hargrave was a shrewd businessman, as you've likely gathered. He had his share of rivals, but nothing that would lead to such a drastic outcome." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And how about personal matters? Any recent arguments or disagreements within the family?" She paused, a flicker of hesitation passing through her eyes before she responded. "Our family is harmonious, Mr. Holmes. We maintain a facade of perfection, as is expected in our social circles." Holmes smiled faintly, appreciating her effort to maintain composure. A commendable trait indeed. However, facades often conceal deeper truths. "Tell me, Lady Hargrave, how is your relationship with your children?" She glanced towards her children, who sat quietly beside her. "They adore their father, and I ensure they are well cared for. We lead a peaceful life." Holmes's sharp eyes missed nothing. The wife's immaculate makeup and flawless attire contrasted sharply with the chaos of the moment, suggesting a woman more accustomed to appearances than genuine emotion. "Thank you, Lady Hargrave. Your cooperation is most helpful." As Holmes excused himself, he exchanged a meaningful look with Watson. "Her calmness is remarkable, Watson. It suggests either an extraordinary level of self-control or a connection to the crime that we have yet to uncover." Watson nodded. "Do you suspect she had a role in his demise?" "Not yet," Holmes replied, his mind already racing ahead. "But her behavior warrants further observation. Let us consider other potential suspects." Turning his attention to the cook and the waiter, Holmes decided it was time to delve deeper into their backgrounds. "Mr. Thompson, you mentioned that everything proceeded as usual during meal service. Can you confirm that all dishes were prepared in the same manner as before?" Mr. Thompson, the cook, nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, sir. I follow the same recipes and procedures every time. There's no reason to deviate." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what about your personal life, Mr. Thompson? Any grievances or conflicts that might provide a motive?" The cook hesitated, glancing nervously at the waiter. "Nothing of significance, sir. My life is simple. I take pride in my work." Holmes gave him a slight nod before turning to the waiter. "And you, young man? Any personal issues that might have led you to harm Mr. Hargrave?" The waiter, whose name was Samuel, looked visibly unsettled. "No, sir. I've always respected Mr. Hargrave. He's been kind to me." Holmes raised an eyebrow, sensing an undercurrent of unspoken tension. "Very well. Thank you both for your honesty. We may need to speak further as our investigation progresses." As the staff returned to their duties, Holmes signalled to Watson. "There is more to uncover here, my friend. Let us broaden our scope." Their attention shifted to the adjacent cabins, where the murmur of other passengers provided a stark contrast to the unfolding drama. Holmes's gaze settled on a particular cabin at the end of the corridor. A man, distinguished, yet visibly agitated, was speaking in hushed tones with another passenger. Holmes motioned to the conductor. "Miss, could you inform us who occupies that cabin?" The conductor glanced nervously towards the cabin before responding. "That's Mr. Victor Langley, a business associate of Mr. Hargrave. They've had disagreements recently over some failed ventures." Holmes's interest was piqued. "Thank you. We shall have a word with Mr. Langley shortly." Moments later, Holmes and Watson approached the cabin. Victor Langley opened the door, his expression guarded. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Mr. Langley," Holmes began, his tone both respectful and inquisitive. "I understand you and Mr. Hargrave have had some professional disagreements. Might you elaborate on the nature of these disputes?" Langley sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yes, Mr. Hargrave was involved in some risky investments that didn't pan out. I've lost a considerable amount of money because of his miscalculations." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "A significant financial loss can breed resentment. Did this affect your personal relationship with him?" Langley's eyes darkened slightly. "It has caused tension, certainly, but I would never resort to such drastic measures as murder." Holmes studied him intently, searching for any sign of deceit. "I admire your candor, Mr. Langley. Financial motives are common, but so are opportunities. We are simply gathering all possible information at this stage." As they left Langley's cabin, Holmes turned to Watson. "Financial motives are potent, but they are only one piece of the puzzle. We must continue to explore all avenues." Back in the main carriage, Holmes signaled to the conductor. "Miss, might we speak with you privately?" In the privacy of a quiet corner, Holmes posed a series of pointed questions. "Miss, you mentioned earlier that you contacted the authorities. How long have you been aware of the internal affairs surrounding Mr. Hargrave?" The conductor hesitated before responding. "I've known of some disputes between Mr. Hargrave and Mr. Langley, as well as others. It's been a topic of conversation among the staff." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with subtle humour. "Ah, so a network of disgruntled individuals? Fascinating. It appears our deceased had more enemies than initially presumed." The conductor nodded, her nervousness slightly eased by Holmes's demeanour. "Yes, sir. There have been murmurs of dissatisfaction and revenge, though nothing concrete." Holmes straightened, a satisfied gleam in his eyes. "Thank you, miss. Your cooperation is invaluable." As they returned to their seats, Holmes's mind was a whirlwind of connections and motives. "We have multiple threads to follow, Watson," he mused. "A business rival with a financial grievance, a composed wife who may hold more secrets than she lets on, and staff members with potential motives rooted in past grievances." Watson leaned back, absorbing the complexity of the situation. It seems Mr. Hargrave's life was intertwined with many, each harbouring their own reasons for wanting him gone. Holmes smiled, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Indeed, Watson, human emotions are as intricate as any labyrinth. Our task is to navigate this maze and uncover the truth hidden within." As the train continued its relentless journey through the night, Holmes and Watson settled into their roles as detectives once more. The carriage, now a microcosm of hidden tensions and veiled animosities, held its breath, waiting for Holmes to unravel the final threads of this enigmatic tapestry. Chapter 4. Hidden Agendas. The Pullman carriage had become a crucible of suspicion, each passenger a potential suspect in the unfolding drama. Sherlock Holmes, ever the relentless investigator, knew that the key to unraveling this mystery lay in delving deeper into the tangled web of relationships surrounding Mr. Hargrave. Holmes leaned back in his seat, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he contemplated the gathered information. Dr. Watson, ever observant, watched his friend with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Where shall we proceed, Holmes?" he inquired. Holmes's piercing gaze returned to Lady Eleanor Hargrave, whose calm demeanour remained an enigma. Watson, I believe our next step lies in applying a bit of psychological pressure on Lady Hargrave. Her composure is too perfect, too calculated. There is more to her than meets the eye. Watson nodded thoughtfully. A delicate approach, but perhaps necessary. What shall we ask her? Holmes stood gracefully, drawing the attention of the assembled family once more. Lady Hargrave, if you would kindly join me for a moment, I have a few additional questions. Eleanor rose smoothly, her posture impeccable. She followed Holmes to a quiet corner of the carriage, the other passengers resuming their subdued conversations. Holmes gestured for her to sit, his demeanour both respectful and assertive.
Lady Hargrave, Holmes began, his voice calm yet penetrating. Your composure is admirable, but I can't help but feel there's more beneath the surface. Did Mr. Hargrave have any recent disputes or concerns that might have caused him significant stress? Eleanor met his gaze steadily, her eyes betraying nothing. Mr. Hargrave was a private man, Shelock. He dealt with matters strictly within his business. If there were any concerns, they were handled discreetly. Holmes nodded slowly, his mind racing ahead. And your relationship with him? Truly harmonious? A flicker of hesitation passed through her eyes, quickly masked by her practiced calm. Our marriage is strong. We support each other in all endeavours. Support? Holmes echoed thoughtfully. Yet support can sometimes mask deeper complexities. Tell me, have you noticed any unusual behaviour or received any threats recently? Eleanor remained silent for a moment before responding. Nothing out of the ordinary. We live a quiet life. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. Quiet lives are often the most complex, Lady Hargrave. It's easy to overlook the undercurrents that flow beneath the surface. I must ask, have you and Mr. Hargrave ever discussed the nature of his business partnerships? Eleanor considered the question, her expression still unreadable. We have discussed them, yes. He valued integrity and expected the same from his associates.
Integrity is paramount, Holmes agreed. Yet integrity can sometimes lead to conflicts, especially in the cutthroat world of business. Did Mr. Hargrave ever mention any particular individual who might have caused him distress or posed a threat to his operations? Eleanor paused, her eyes briefly darting away, before returning to meet Holmes's steady gaze. There were always challenges, but Mr. Hargrave handled them with his usual resolve. Nothing that would jeopardize his well-being. Holmes studied her intently, sensing a subtle shift in her demeanour. Very well, Lady Hargrave. Your cooperation has been most enlightening. Should you recall anything else, no matter how trivial, please do not hesitate to inform me. As Eleanor returned to her seat, Holmes exchanged a knowing look with Watson. Her responses are consistent, but her composure suggests she is either extraordinarily resilient or perhaps hiding something. We must remain vigilant. Watson leaned in, intrigued. What about the man in the adjacent cabin, Mr. Victor Langley? You mentioned earlier that their relationship had soured. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, Langley stands to gain nothing but harbour significant resentment. A financial loss of this magnitude can breed deep-seated animosity. I intend to investigate further. Rising from his seat, Holmes made his way to Langley's cabin, with Watson close behind. The corridor was dimly lit, shadows dancing along the polished walls as the train rumbled steadily onward. Holmes knocked lightly before the door opened to reveal Victor Langley, a man whose distinguished appearance was marred by evident tension. Mr. Langley, Holmes greeted him smoothly. May we have a word? Langley hesitated before stepping aside, allowing them entry. Of course, Mr. Holmes. How can I assist you? Holmes took a seat, his gaze unwavering. I understand you and Mr. Hargrave had some professional disagreements recently. Could you elaborate on the nature of these disputes? Langley sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. Mr. Hargrave was involved in several ventures that were, shall we say, less than successful. I invested heavily based on his assurances, but the returns never materialized. It's been a source of great frustration. Financial strain can certainly lead to tension, Holmes remarked. But would you say this tension extended beyond mere business matters, perhaps into more personal realms? Langley's expression darkened. While business was the primary issue, the stress inevitably seeped into personal interactions. But murder, that's beyond anything I would consider. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes locking on to Langley's. Resentment, when unchecked, can lead to drastic actions. It's important to recognize how these emotions can cloud one's judgment. Langley met his gaze with a mixture of defensiveness and unease. I assure you, Mr. Holmes, my intentions have always been professional. I have no reason to harm Mr. Hargrave. Holmes remained silent for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Understood? Thank you for your time, Mr. Langley. Should you recall any additional information, please inform me immediately. As they exited Langley's cabin, Holmes turned to Watson, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Financial motives are potent, but they are merely one thread in this intricate tapestry. We must continue to explore all possible avenues. Their next stop was the compartment where the cook, Mr. Thompson, and the waiter, Samuel, had been stationed. Holmes had instructed the conductor to arrange a private conversation. The cook appeared visibly unsettled, his earlier nervousness now heightened, while Samuel seemed increasingly agitated. Mr. Thompson, Samuel, Holmes began, his tone both commanding and reassuring. I believe there are underlying factors that may have contributed to Mr. Hargrave's untimely demise. I need to delve deeper into your backgrounds. Mr. Thompson shifted uneasily. I've told you everything I know, Mr. Holmes. Holmes raised a hand to pause him. Not quite. Mr. Thompson, did you have any interactions with Mr. Hargrave outside of your professional relationship? Any disputes or grievances? Thompson hesitated before responding. Well, there was an incident a few years ago. Mr. Hargrave was involved in a business deal that went sour. It cost him dearly, and as a result, his brother faced significant financial hardships. It was a difficult time for our family. Holmes's eyes sparkled with interest. So, Mr. Thompson, you lost a brother due to Mr. Hargrave's actions? Thompson nodded slowly. Yes, sir. It was never discussed openly, but the resentment lingered. Turning to Samuel, Holmes posed a similar question. And you, Samuel, have you ever had any conflicts with Mr. Hargrave? Samuel swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously. There was a gathering a few months back. Mr. Hargrave made some insensitive remarks about my work. It was uncalled for, and I felt humiliated. Holmes leaned back, his mind piecing together the new information. Thank you both. It appears Mr. Hargrave's actions have left more than one individual with a motive. Resentment and unresolved grievances can fester, leading to desperate measures. As they departed, Holmes turned to Watson. We now have multiple threads to follow: a disgruntled business associate, a cook who lost a brother, and a waiter humiliated by our victim. Each holds a potential motive. Watson frowned thoughtfully. What about the conductor? You mentioned she had a connection as well. Holmes nodded. Indeed, we must explore her background. Personal vendettas can be just as lethal as professional ones. Returning to the main carriage, Holmes signalled to the conductor to join them once more. In a quiet corner, away from prying eyes, he began his inquiry.
Miss, could you share more about your sister's interactions with Mr. Hargrave? The conductor's eyes widened slightly, a shadow of fear crossing her features. My sister worked for Mr. Hargrave a few years ago. There were disagreements over her role and compensation. It ended abruptly and she left the company under strained circumstances. Holmes's mind raced with connections. So, you have a personal grievance against Mr. Hargrave as well? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. It was a difficult period for my family. Holmes leaned forward, his voice gentle yet firm. Resentment can be a powerful motivator. I appreciate your honesty, miss. Your cooperation is crucial to our investigation. As they returned to their seats, Holmes's thoughts churned. Each individual connected to Mr. Hargrave harboured their own reasons for wanting him gone. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a clearer picture, yet the true mastermind remained elusive. Watson, Holmes mused, it appears Mr. Hargrave's actions have sown the seeds of his own demise. Multiple parties with motives have converged on this very train, each waiting for the opportune moment. Watson looked intrigued. But who among them would have the means and opportunity to administer poison discreetly? Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. That is the crux of our investigation. We must consider not just motive, but also opportunity and method. The calmness of Lady Hargrave suggests she is intricately linked to this plot, perhaps the orchestrator. As the train continued its relentless journey through the night, Holmes and Watson delved deeper into the tangled web of relationships and motives. The confined space of the carriage seemed to amplify the tension, each passenger a silent witness to the dark undercurrents flowing within. Holmes knew that time was of the essence. With the police still hours away, the clock was ticking, and the true perpetrator could be among them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. It was a race against time, and Sherlock Holmes was determined to uncover the truth before the next station brought the authorities and perhaps the resolution of this enigmatic case. Chapter 5. Layers of Deceit. The Pullman carriage had transformed into a veritable theatre of suspicion, each passenger an unwitting actor in a drama of concealed motives and hidden grudges. Sherlock Holmes, ever the master of deduction, felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align, albeit still shrouded in mystery. Dr. John Watson, his loyal companion, observed Holmes with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, aware that each revelation only deepened the intrigue. Holmes leaned forward, his sharp eyes glinting with renewed purpose. Watson, it is time we delve deeper into the backgrounds of those connected to Mr. Hargrave. Each thread we've uncovered suggests a tapestry of vendettas woven with meticulous intent. Watson nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Indeed, Holmes, the cook, Mr. Thompson, lost his brother because of Hargrave's actions. The waiter, Samuel, was publicly insulted, and the conductor harbours resentment due to her sister's unfortunate encounter with our deceased. It seems each has a personal vendetta. Holmes stood gracefully, the faint scent of his pipe trailing behind him as he moved towards the centre of the carriage. Let us consider the timing, Watson. Each of these individuals has harboured their grievances for some time, yet they all find themselves aboard this very train tonight. The alignment of their journeys is no mere coincidence. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Imagine, if you will, a scenario where each of these individuals has deliberately chosen this train to execute their vendetta. A collective plot, meticulously planned to ensure the demise of Mr. Hargrave. Watson's eyes widened slightly. A conspiracy, Holmes. That's a substantial leap. Holmes chuckled softly, a hint of his characteristic humour breaking through the tension. Not a leap, my dear Watson, but a logical progression. Let us examine each motive more closely. He approached Mr. Thompson, the cook, whose earlier revelation about his brother still lingered in the air.
Mr. Thompson, you mentioned that Mr. Hargrave's actions led to your brother's untimely death. Can you elaborate on that? Mr. Thompson swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. Yes, sir. It was a business deal gone wrong. Mr. Hargrave's miscalculations not only ruined my brother's finances, but also his health. He never recovered from the stress. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. A profound loss indeed. Now, Samuel, you stated that Mr. Hargrave insulted you at a recent gathering. Could you describe the nature of this insult? Samuel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact. He dismissed my efforts in front of everyone, claiming my work was subpar. It was humiliating and uncalled for. Holmes turned his attention to the conductor, Miss Clara Bennett, who had been silent until now. Miss Bennett, you mentioned that Mr. Hargrave wronged your sister. Can you shed more light on that? Clara's eyes flickered with a mix of pain and resentment. Yes, sir. My sister was employed by Mr. Hargrave, but he never acknowledged her contributions. When she demanded fair compensation, he retaliated by abruptly terminating her contract, leaving her in dire straits. Holmes took a step back, his mind weaving together the threads of their stories. Each of you has suffered due to Mr. Hargrave's actions, and each of you harbored a grievance significant enough to warrant drastic measures. Watson interjected gently. But why now, Holmes? Why on this train? Holmes smiled, a subtle glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Timing, Watson. They've likely orchestrated this convergence meticulously, ensuring that each of their paths would intersect on this journey. The long wait until the next station provides ample time to execute their plan without immediate interference. He paced slowly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The poison was administered through a specific portion of the meal, ensuring only Mr. Hargrave was affected. This suggests a coordinated effort to isolate him as the target while sparing the rest of his family. Watson frowned, contemplating the implications. A joint effort would explain the selectivity, but how did they manage to keep their plot concealed? Holmes's eyes twinkled with insight. They each played their roles to perfection. The cook and the waiter had access to the meal, the conductor had control over the service, and Lady Hargrave's impeccable composure diverted suspicion away from herself. It's a symphony of deceit, each note carefully orchestrated. He turned towards Lady Eleanor Hargrave, who had been observing the conversation with an inscrutable expression. And what of you, Lady Hargrave? Your calmness is indeed remarkable. Could it be that you were the linchpin in this conspiracy? Eleanor's eyes met Holmes's, revealing nothing. I assure you, Mr. Holmes, I had no involvement in my husband's affairs beyond what is publicly known. Holmes inclined his head respectfully. Of course, Lady Hargrave. Yet your position within the family afforded you the perfect opportunity to observe and influence the dynamics at play. It's worth noting, though, that orchestrating such a plot would require a level of coordination that extends beyond mere association. As Holmes concluded his musings, the train continued its relentless journey through the night, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels underscoring the gravity of the unfolding mystery. Holmes and Watson retreated to their seats, the weight of their discoveries pressing upon them. Watson broke the silence, his voice tinged with concern. Holmes, if what you're suggesting is true, we're dealing with a group of conspirators, each driven by their own vendetta, yet united in their intent. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Precisely, Watson. It's a complex web of emotions and motives, each strand interwoven with the others. Their collective resentment has culminated in this calculated act of retribution. He paused, his gaze distant, as he contemplated the implications. However, there remains an element of unpredictability. Human emotions, no matter how meticulously planned, are inherently volatile. The slightest deviation could unravel their scheme. Watson smiled wryly. Much like a finely tuned instrument, it's subject to the whims of its player. Holmes returned the smile, a rare display of levity. Indeed, Watson. Now we must proceed with caution. The conspirators are still aboard, and their true intentions may yet reveal themselves as the journey progresses. As the night deepened and the train hurtled toward its uncertain destination, Holmes and Watson remained ever vigilant, poised to uncover the final layers of deceit that bound this enigmatic case. The shadows within the carriage seemed to lengthen, each passenger a potential harbinger of truth or further mystery, as the midnight convergence edged closer to its inevitable climax. Chapter 6. The Web Tightens. The Pullman carriage hummed with subdued conversations and the occasional clink of cutlery against china. Shadows danced along the polished walls, cast by the soft glow of the overhead lamps. Sherlock Holmes, ever the vigilant observer, stood amidst the gathered passengers, his sharp eyes meticulously scanning each face. Dr. John Watson remained by his side, sensing that the moment of revelation was drawing near. Holmes took a deep breath, his presence commanding the attention of all within the carriage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm yet authoritative, "it appears tonight's tragedy is no mere accident, but a meticulously planned act of vengeance." A collective murmur rippled through the passengers, eyes darting nervously between one another. Holmes's gaze settled on each suspect in turn: the cook, the waiter, Lady Hargrave, Victor Langley, and Miss Clara Bennet, the conductor. Each bore the subtle signs of concealed emotions, nervous tics, fleeting glances and guarded postures. He continued, "Allow me to summarize the facts as they stand. Mr. Hargrave, a wealthy businessman with numerous adversaries, was poisoned during dinner. The method was subtle, ensuring only he was affected while sparing his family. This suggests a selective approach, indicative of calculated intent." Watson watched as Holmes laid out the intricate web of motives. "We have Mr. Langley, whose financial losses at Mr. Hargrave's hands have left him embittered. Mr. Thompson, the cook, who lost his brother due to a failed business deal orchestrated by our victim. Samuel, the waiter, humiliated by a public insult from Mr. Hargrave. And Miss Bennet, the conductor, whose sister suffered under Mr. Hargrave's employment practices." Holmes paused, allowing the weight of these connections to sink in. "Each of you has a reason to despise Mr. Hargrave. However, the question remains, who among you possessed both the motive and the means to execute such a precise act?" He turned his piercing gaze to Lady Eleanor Hargrave, whose serene facade seemed to mask deeper complexities. "Lady Hargrave, your composure is indeed remarkable. It suggests either an extraordinary level of self-control or a connection to this plot that we have yet to uncover." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, her eyes betraying nothing. "Mr. Holmes, I assure you my concerns are purely for my family's well-being." Holmes nodded thoughtfully before addressing the room once more. "The poison was administered through a specific portion of the meal, indicating a deliberate choice. This requires coordination between the individual who prepared the food and the one who served it." He turned to Mr. Thompson and Samuel, who sat uneasily beside the family. "Mr. Thompson, Samuel, your roles in this event are undeniably crucial. However, your cooperation thus far has been candid. Are there any details you have omitted that might aid in this investigation?" Mr. Thompson shook his head firmly. "No, sir. I've told you everything I know." Samuel glanced nervously between Holmes and the other passengers. "Nothing more to add, sir, I assure you." Holmes's eyes twinkled with subtle humour as he regarded the two. "Very well. Sometimes honesty is the best policy, even in the face of dire circumstances." He then shifted his attention to Miss Bennet. Miss Bennet, as the conductor, you had control over the train's operations. Did you notice anything unusual during the meal service? Any deviations from the norm? Clara hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. No, Mr. Holmes, everything proceeded as usual. Holmes nodded, appreciating her forthrightness. Thank you, Miss Bennet. Your cooperation is appreciated. Turning back to the group, Holmes began to weave the final threads of his deduction. The alignment of motives suggests a collective grudge against Mr. Hargrave. Each of you suffered due to his actions, and tonight you found yourselves aboard the same train, a long journey with no immediate police intervention. He paced slowly, his movements deliberate. This convergence is no accident. It is a calculated encounter orchestrated to ensure that Mr. Hargrave's demise would remain concealed until the authorities arrived at the next station, hours away. Watson leaned in, intrigued. So you're suggesting a coordinated effort among multiple parties? Holmes paused, allowing the implication to resonate. Precisely, Watson. The selective poisoning indicates collaboration. Each individual played a specific role. The cook prepared the meal, the waiter served it, and the conductor ensured the train remained undisturbed by outside interference. A hush fell over the carriage as passengers absorbed Holmes's analysis. This is a symphony of deceit, each note carefully orchestrated to achieve a singular purpose, Holmes concluded, his tone both admiring and critical. However, such a plan relies heavily on trust and secrecy. One misstep, one moment of vulnerability could unravel the entire scheme. He glanced around the room, his eyes settling on each suspect with renewed intensity. It is fascinating how human emotions, resentment, anger, humiliation, can drive individuals to such lengths, yet trust and cooperation among conspirators are inherently fragile. Holmes took a moment to assess the reactions of those present. We stand on the precipice of truth, and it is my duty to ensure that justice is served, even if it means uncovering uncomfortable realities. Lady Hargrave remained impassive, but Holmes noticed a subtle tightening in her grip on her handbag. The cook and waiter exchanged uneasy glances while Victor Langley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Miss Bennet, too, seemed slightly more relaxed, perhaps reassured by Holmes's logical approach. Holmes turned to Watson, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. The web has indeed tightened, Watson. Each of these individuals has woven themselves into this intricate plot, driven by their personal vendettas. Watson nodded, his admiration for Holmes's brilliance evident. Your deductions are impeccable, Holmes. But how do we proceed to ensure that the true orchestrators are brought to light? Holmes smiled subtly, a spark of his characteristic humor shining through. Patience, my dear Watson. The human element is unpredictable. As we continue our observations, the slightest inconsiderate gesture or misplaced glance will serve as the catalyst for unraveling this elaborate scheme. He leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window as the train sped through the night. For now, we must remain vigilant, watching for any signs of discord or betrayal among the passengers. The truth lies hidden within their interactions, waiting to be uncovered. As the carriage continued its journey, the atmosphere remained thick with tension and unspoken suspicions. Holmes and Watson settled into their seats, the weight of their discoveries pressing upon them. The train's steady rhythm mirrored the relentless pursuit of truth that defined Holmes's quest. In the confined space of the Pullman carriage, the intricate dance of deceit and vengeance reached a critical juncture. The midnight convergence had set the stage for a dramatic unveiling, and Sherlock Holmes was poised to navigate the labyrinth of human emotions to uncover the hidden truths that bound this enigmatic case. Chapter 7. The Silent Conspiracy. The Pullman carriage had grown increasingly silent, the passengers ensnared in their own webs of anxiety and suspicion. The rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels against the tracks provided a constant, almost hypnotic backdrop to the unfolding drama. Sherlock Holmes, ever the vigilant observer, sat in deep contemplation, his keen eyes flicking from one passenger to another, searching for the faintest hint of deceit. Dr. John Watson watched his friend with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Holmes," he began softly, "you seem more absorbed than ever. Have you uncovered something new?" Holmes glanced up, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Patience, Watson. The truth reveals itself in its own time. However, there are indeed new developments worth noting." He leaned back, his gaze settling on the assembled group once more. Each individual was a puzzle piece, their interactions a complex tapestry of hidden motives and concealed alliances. Holmes's sharp eyes caught the slightest nuances, the way Mr. Langley tapped his fingers impatiently, the waiter Samuel's uneasy shuffling, and Lady Eleanor Hargrave's unwavering composure. As the hours dragged on, the confined space of the carriage seemed to amplify every subtle gesture and fleeting glance. Holmes observed how Miss Clara Bennet, the conductor, avoided eye contact when certain topics arose, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The cook, Mr. Thompson, frequently glanced toward the rear of the coach as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. Holmes's mind raced, piecing together the silent cues that others might overlook. "Watson," he whispered, "notice how each of our suspects exhibits signs of nervousness when specific subjects are broached. It suggests a shared awareness, a collective tension that binds them together." Watson nodded thoughtfully. "So, you believe they're not acting independently, but rather as part of a coordinated effort?" "Precisely," Holmes replied. "The absence of overt hostility, the calculated calmness, these are indicators of a silent conspiracy. They are all complicit in their own subtle ways, contributing to the downfall of Mr. Hargrave without direct confrontation." Holmes stood gracefully, drawing the attention of the entire carriage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "I have come to a realization. This incident is not the work of a lone individual, but rather a collective effort born out of shared grievances." A hush fell over the passengers, eyes darting nervously from Holmes to one another. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken accusations and hidden fears. Holmes approached Lady Eleanor Hargrave, his piercing gaze fixed upon her. "Lady Hargrave," he said softly, "your calmness is indeed remarkable. It suggests you know more than you're letting on. Perhaps you've orchestrated this convergence." Eleanor's facade remained unbroken, her eyes meeting Holmes's with unwavering steadiness. For a fleeting moment, a crack appeared in her composed exterior, a flicker of uncertainty quickly masked by her practiced poise. Holmes held her gaze, his expression unwavering. "No, your role is more complex. You're a pivotal piece in this intricate puzzle." Eleanor took a measured breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mr. Holmes, I assure you, my concerns are solely for my family's well-being. I had no part in my husband's demise." Holmes inclined his head thoughtfully. "I understand your position, Lady Hargrave. However, your impeccable composure and the way you subtly guided certain aspects of the meal service suggest a deeper involvement. Perhaps you were aware of the collective intent, or even played a role in its execution." Eleanor's eyes momentarily betrayed a hint of vulnerability before she regained her composure. "I can only speak to what I know, Mr. Holmes. My husband's affairs were strictly business. If there were any conspiracies, I was unaware." Holmes stepped back, considering her words carefully. "Your denial is noted, but your behavior warrants further scrutiny. The lack of visible distress, the seamless coordination during the meal service, these are not mere coincidences. Turning to the rest of the carriage, Holmes continued, "Each of you has harbored a grudge against Mr. Hargrave, whether it was financial loss, personal humiliation, or familial strife. Your collective grievances have culminated in this tragic event. Yet the method of execution, a subtle, selective poisoning, requires a level of cooperation and trust that is seldom found outside of a tightly knit group." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "This is a silent conspiracy orchestrated through careful planning and mutual understanding. Each of you played your part to ensure the success of this endeavor while maintaining plausible deniability." Watson watched as the tension in the carriage mounted, the passengers grappling with the weight of Holmes's deductions. "Holmes," Watson whispered, "are you certain about this?" Holmes nodded slowly. "I am, Watson. The evidence points towards a collective effort. Their synchronized actions, the shared motives, and the seamless execution all indicate a well-orchestrated plot. However, the true mastermind remains concealed, perhaps hiding in plain sight, among us." He glanced once more at Lady Hargrave, her expression still inscrutable. "The key to unraveling this conspiracy lies in understanding the dynamics of their collaboration. Trust is the cornerstone of any collective endeavor, and with trust comes the potential for betrayal. One misstep, one moment of vulnerability, could unravel the entire scheme." As the train continued its relentless journey through the night, Holmes and Watson settled into their roles as detectives once more. The atmosphere in the carriage was thick with unspoken tensions and concealed truths, each passenger a silent player in this unfolding drama. Holmes leaned closer to Watson, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are on the brink of uncovering the final pieces of this puzzle, my friend. It is only a matter of time before the true nature of their conspiracy is brought to light." Watson nodded, his admiration for Holmes's brilliance evident. "Your insight never ceases to amaze me, Holmes, but how do we proceed without tipping our hand?" Holmes smiled subtly, a twinkle of his characteristic humor shining through. "We continue to observe, Watson. Human behavior is a treasure trove of information. The smallest inconsiderate gesture, the slightest inconsistency in their stories will serve as the catalyst for unraveling this elaborate scheme." As the night deepened and the train hurtled toward its uncertain destination, Holmes and Watson remained ever vigilant. The confined space of the Pullman carriage had become a crucible in which the truth would be forged, and Sherlock Holmes was determined to uncover the hidden truths that lay entwined with the shadow of death. The silent conspiracy had tightened its grip, but Holmes's unwavering determination and unparalleled intellect stood as the beacon of hope in the darkness, guiding them toward the inevitable revelation that awaited at the journey's end. Chapter 8. The Unveiled Truth. The Pullman carriage had settled into an expectant silence, the passengers huddled in their seats, each lost in their own thoughts. The long journey through the night had weighed heavily on everyone, the unresolved tension palpable in the air. Sherlock Holmes, however, remained unruffled, his sharp mind still tirelessly piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. Holmes leaned back in his seat, a contemplative expression on his face. Dr. John Watson, ever observant, watched his friend with a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. "Holmes," he began softly, "have you reached a conclusion?" Holmes met Watson's gaze, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed, Watson, the solution to this intricate mystery lies in understanding not just the motives, but the very nature of human relationships and the shadows they cast." Watson leaned forward, eager to hear his friend's deductions. "Please, Holmes, do tell." Holmes took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the faces of the assembled passengers, one last time. We began with a seemingly straightforward case of poisoning, but as always the truth is far more complex. Let us revisit the key players and their motivations. He gestured towards Mr. Victor Langley, whose financial losses had been a significant point of contention. Mr. Langley, burdened by substantial debts due to Mr. Hargrave's failed ventures, certainly harboured resentment. Yet his motives, while strong, lacked the personal vendetta necessary for such a calculated act. Next, Holmes moved his attention to Mr. Thompson, the cook. Mr. Thompson, who lost his brother because of Hargrave's business dealings, possesses both motive and access. However, the fact that the poison was administered selectively suggests a level of precision that one individual alone might find challenging to achieve without assistance. Samuel, the waiter, had been humiliated by Mr. Hargrave's public insults. Samuel's humiliation provides a plausible motive, but again, the method of execution points to a coordinated effort rather than the actions of a solitary individual. Holmes then turned to Miss Clara Bennet, the conductor. Miss Bennet, whose sister suffered under Mr. Hargrave's employment practices, also has a clear motive. Her role on the train, controlling access and overseeing operations, would grant her the means to carry out such an act discreetly. Finally, Holmes's gaze settled on Lady Eleanor Hargrave, the composed wife. Lady Hargrave's impeccable demeanour and flawless appearance initially served as a red herring, diverting suspicion away from her. However, upon closer examination, her behaviour reveals subtle inconsistencies. Watson frowned, puzzled. "Are you suggesting, Holmes, that Lady Hargrave is the key to this mystery?" Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Not entirely, Watson, but she plays a pivotal role. Her calmness is not merely a facade of composure, but a calculated effort to maintain control over the situation. Let us consider the dynamics at play." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The poison was administered through a specific portion of the meal, ensuring only Mr. Hargrave was affected. This indicates that the act was deliberate and targeted, requiring both knowledge of his eating habits and access to his meal. Holmes's eyes sparkled with realization. Lady Hargrave, as the mistress of the household, would have intimate knowledge of her husband's routines and preferences. Furthermore, her role as a hostess would grant her unobstructed access to the meal preparation and serving process. Watson leaned in, captivated by the unfolding deduction. But why would she go to such lengths? Holmes's expression grew solemn. "Revenge, Watson." Lady Hargrave discovered that her husband was not only a ruthless businessman, but also involved in illicit activities that endangered their family's reputation and safety. When confronted, Mr. Hargrave dismissed her concerns, pushing her into a corner where drastic measures became the only recourse. He continued, "By maintaining her composure, Lady Hargrave ensured that suspicion remained elsewhere. Her collaboration with Mr. Thompson and Samuel was subtle, allowing her to orchestrate the poisoning without direct involvement. Miss Bennet, leveraging her position, facilitated the smooth execution of the plan, ensuring no immediate interference." Watson's eyes widened in realization. So Lady Hargrave orchestrated the entire conspiracy, manipulating each participant to fulfill their roles while shielding herself from suspicion. Holmes nodded affirmatively. Precisely. Her ability to mask her true intentions under the guise of a composed widow allowed her to navigate the complex web of relationships and motives seamlessly. The collective grievances of Mr. Thompson, Samuel, and Miss Bennet were harnessed to achieve her singular objective. A heavy silence enveloped the carriage as the passengers grappled with the revelation. Lady Hargrave remained impassive, her expression unchanging, though Holmes had detected a fleeting hint of vulnerability beneath her steadfast exterior. Holmes turned to Watson, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "And now, Watson, the final piece falls into place. The poison was not the work of a single individual, but a meticulously coordinated effort led by Lady Hargrave to end her husband's reign of ruthlessness." Before Watson could respond, the train began to slow, signalling their approach to the next station. The conductor, Miss Bennet, emerged from her duties with a sombre expression, her role in the conspiracy laid bare by Holmes's keen deductions. As the train pulled into the station, the police were already waiting, their presence a stark contrast to the midnight intrigue that had unfolded within the carriage. The authorities quickly moved to secure the scene, questioning the passengers and documenting the evidence. Holmes watched the proceedings with a detached calm. He chose not to divulge his conclusions, allowing the complexity of the situation to unfold as the police attempted to piece together the truth. Lady Hargrave, ever the composed figure, faced the officers with unwavering grace, her secrets remaining concealed beneath layers of propriety. As the last of the police had taken their positions, Holmes turned to Watson, a subtle smile gracing his features. The truth, as always, has a way of revealing itself in due course. Sometimes it is best to let the law follow its course without interference. Watson nodded, understanding the depth of Holmes's restraint. A fitting conclusion to a convoluted tale. Holmes gazed out the window, the first light of dawn beginning to pierce the darkness. Indeed, Watson, the journey itself was the catalyst, and the convergence of grievances led to an inevitable resolution. Now we must leave the mystery to its own devices and let the dawn bring clarity. As the passengers disembarked, the carriage returned to its former tranquility, the shadows of the night giving way to the promise of a new day. Holmes and Watson, their roles as detectives complete, shared a moment of quiet reflection. Watson broke the silence, his voice tinged with admiration. "Once again, Holmes, your brilliance has untangled the most intricate of knots." Holmes simply smiled, a twinkle of subtle humor in his eyes. "Merely observing the human condition, my dear Watson. It is in the complexities of the mind that the greatest mysteries reside." As they stepped onto the platform, the mystery of the midnight convergence remained a whispered tale among the departing passengers. The true nature of the conspiracy lingered in the shadows, a testament to the intricate dance of deceit and revelation that only Sherlock Holmes could navigate with such finesse.